Hi, welcome in my next video on my learning on the Microsoft Azure Administrator Associate exam. In this video, we will take a look at lab number 6, which concerns configuring Azure Load Balancer. This is part of the module on configuring and managing virtual networks of the exam. So the interactive lab simulation of this module concerns the following architecture diagram. And in this video, we will focus on task 1 and a part of task 2, namely the creation of the resource groups and the virtual networks. Let's talk first a bit about the architecture, what it looks like. So the lab concerns a hub and spoke virtual network, which means that we have a central point called the hub of the wheel, and we have the spokes of the wheel, which are the two spoke virtual networks here in resource group 2 and 3. A couple of points about the image that I want to point out now. I think there's two mistakes. First of all, the first spoke virtual network has VNet2 and VM2. Therefore, I believe this should be resource group 2 and not resource group 1. And the same thing can be said for the second spoke virtual network, which has VM3 and VNet3, which again, I think this should be resource group 3. A second difference that I will do differently in this video, I will not use the index 01 for the VNet1, I will just call it VNet1, and I will change the IP addresses a bit as well to reflect the one index in them. But we will get to this point when we are configuring the networks. In this video, I will for now leave out the peering and leave out the resource group 4 with the load balancer and resource group 5 with the application gateway for a later video. So let's get started. I have my Azure CLI here, and I can show you that in the Azure portal, I have absolutely nothing relating to this lab. I have my own website in Azure, I have Network Watcher, and I have some cloud shell storage, which we will not use in this video at all. Okay, so let's get started with creating first the resource groups. For this, we use the AZ group noun with a create verb. And I think the only important thing for creation of for a resource group is just to give it a name, and a location will be by default. For me, West Europe. So I will not specify the location at every time. And the name will be resource group 1. And very similarly, we do that for resource group 2 and for resource group 3. Now, let's first start with the virtual network of the first spoke virtual network, because it's a bit easier than the one in the hub. In the hub, we have 2 subnets. In the spoke, we have only 1. So we're now focusing essentially on task 4. Yes, the left spoke virtual network. To create the VNet, we use the AZ network VNet nouns and the create verb. If we autocomplete the dashes, it will list us all the possible flags that we can use for the creation of this virtual network. And if we look at it, again, I think it makes a lot of sense to start with the name of this virtual network. And I will name it, of course, AZ-104 VNet2, because we are now working in the second resource group. The next thing we have to complete are the address prefixes. The address prefixes essentially indicate what the IP address of this virtual network will be. And I will just copy the IP address which is provided here. It will be a /22 virtual network, so 6200/22. The next flag that we will create will pertain to the subnet, which means that we will give the subnet a name. And this is where I will deviate a bit from what's in the image. I don't like to have my subnets indexed by 0. I prefer to think in subnet 1 and subnet 2 instead of subnet 0. So I will take the freedom to call my subnet subnet 1. And as its subnet prefixes, which will be the IP address of this subnet, we will use the IP address 1062, which comes from the virtual network. But then I will use the next byte will be a 1 to reflect that this is subnet 1 instead of a 0, as you can see in the image. .0, and this will be a /24 virtual network. Let's see if there's anything else we have missing. If we go look here from left to right, the address prefixes we have defined, they are here. All this is not necessary for now. Location comes from the resource group, which we have to add. That's something I haven't done yet. So the flag resource group, and we can use tab to autocomplete, will be resource group, not resource group 1, but resource group 2, because it's the second network, is the first spoke virtual network. Let's quickly do a sanity check. We have the name vnet2, IP address .62, that looks good. We have one subnet, .62.1/24 in the second resource group. So that looks good. Let's go ahead and create this. The command seems to be running fine. And while this command runs, let's take a look at the second spoke virtual network. The command completed. We see here that it's essentially exactly the same thing. It's a mirror image of the first spoke virtual network, which means that we can go much faster. We will just look at our command we had before, go to the beginning and just update everywhere where we see a 2 by a 3. So vnet1 will be vnet3. The 10.62 will be 10.63. Subnet 1 will remain subnet 1 because I also want to have a subnet 1 in my virtual network 3. The prefixes will be 1063 for the subnet. And finally, it will be created in resource group 3. Okay? So now we are creating in a very similar fashion the resource group 3. And I guess that's really the advantage of working on the CLI, is that when you do things which are quite similar, you can just rerun the previous command with some minor modifications. Okay, so now we have the second virtual network. Let's now concentrate on the first virtual network, so the one who is in resource group 1 over here. This one is a bit more tricky because there we have an additional subnet. We have 2 subnets. Nevertheless, we can rerun the previous command because we can reuse quite a bit from it. We see again we have AZ network vnet create, but instead of using the index 3, we will use vnet1. It will have the address prefixes 1061.00, and again this is where I deviate a bit from the exercise. I want vnet1 to be 10.61, not 10.60, because for me it's just easier to understand, to keep it in my head with this convention. Again, the subnet prefixes will be 10.61, and as you may notice, here we configure the first subnet, which in the image is subnet 0. In my code it's subnet 1, which we only do this for subnet 1, because as you will see later, we will create subnet 2 with a different command. And finally, it will not be in resource group 3, but in resource group 1. So let's go ahead and create this virtual network. Okay, it should be running. Great, now it's created. As I said earlier, we have to create the subnet 2 separately. So for this, we use the command AZ network, the noun network, the noun vnet, and then a third noun subnet with the verb create. We're going to create a subnet. Let's see what flags we have. So the first obvious flag is to give it a name. I will name it subnet2. Right. The second flag that we have to create is to specify the address prefixes. So this will be the IP address of the subnet. And this subnet is subnet2, so I will have the IP address 10.61 because it's VNet1, .2 because it's subnet2, and then .0/24 as the IP address. Let's see what else we have to add by autocompletion. That this one we have, the address prefixes, the name we have as well. This one we can leave for now. NSG don't need that for now. We will need the VNet name just to specify in which VNet we create this subnet. And that will be AZ-104 VNet 1. Again, not 01. I prefer to have VNet 1 because here we have VNet 2 and VNet 3 so that everything is nice and consistent. And finally, we have to specify the resource group from which it will also derive the location. And the resource group we can get by auto-completion. It will be resource group 1. So let's do a sanity check. We have subnet 2 with IP address .2. Will be created on VNet 1 in resource group RG1. That looks good. Let's execute this. Okay. Great, so now we have our virtual networks. Let's see if we can actually view them. I think the one which is most interesting to take a look at will be the virtual network VNet 1, because that one has two subnets. So let's inspect it with AZ network VNet show, and then we give the name of this virtual network. That will be AZ VNet 1. And we have to specify the resource group. That will be in resource group 1. The output will be JSON because the JSON output will also display all the subnets. So we have VNet 1 with IP address 10.61.0.0. That looks good. We have its subnet 1 has address prefix 61.1, where this one reflects the subnet index. And we have for subnet 2, we have 10.61.2. Right, so that looks good. Let's also check out quickly the virtual networks in the other resource group. So AZ network VNet show. We will look at VNet 2 in resource group 2, but this time I want the output to be a table. And we see indeed we have this VNet 2, and there. We can do something very similar for VNet 3, where we say that we have VNet 3 in resource group 3. Okay, so that looks great. We have our 3 resource groups, and we have configured the virtual network and its subnets for each resource group. In the next video, we will take a closer look at creating the virtual machines in these networks and configuring also the peering.